challenge.
Over to you, the audience. I think there's going to be some microphones that are available, and if you can keep it, we welcome some comments on what you've heard so far. But if you can keep those reasonably brief, and then ask a question of the panel or a panel member. I'm looking up here with Shane. There's a hand up down here.
G'day, my name's Sean, I'm from Toowoomba. Just got a quick question. We have very detailed definitions of disease, but the best definitions we have of health, while holistic, remain vague and often drawn up a long time ago. I've got a bit of a twofold question. Can we develop a rigorous set of health indices that allow us to scientifically evaluate the efficacy of interventions, because science is a powerful tool? And would this be a useful concept to pursue in a global perspective and get away from this problem of mass marketing of disease-based research and more into a health-based research?
Michael, do you want to take that up?
I get that one, do I?
Definitely yours.
Spent all my career focusing on diseases rather than health. It seems to me to be a very difficult question. Obviously, I think Bibi mentioned before. You can't just measure health by lack of disease, and particularly, I think you're taking into account their mental health and how happy you feel. And we certainly know that wealth doesn't buy happiness, and it doesn't always buy health. But the wealthier people are, generally speaking, more healthy than the less wealthy. That's just a fact, but they don't always go together. But in terms of getting health, how well you feel, I'm aware that there are indices which various nations publish on that very issue. Now, I can't recall the data, but I know Australia isn't at the top of that. But I think we're certainly not at the bottom either. I think we're near the top. I don't know what those indices are and how they're compiled, but I guess it's a general measure of well-being, which would incorporate clearly lack of illness, or illness would have an effect on your answer to those questions. Obviously, employment would have an answer. The environment would have a major effect on how you answered that question. So I think there are indices. They're not widely taught in medical school, I can tell you that. Well, they weren't when I was a student, but I think they're very important.
I've got a sort of in one way, a pro-biomedical approach to this. But it's a biomedical approach that says keep doctors and medical researchers doing what they do, because we need them to do what they do, and it's disease-focused, but let them not take over the entire health agenda. So I remember a meeting not that long ago where the CEO of the Alfred Hospital, which is a big hospital in Melbourne, came to talk with us, and our head of department said to me that I shouldn't open my mouth because... Anyway, he said something that just made me think, so of course I said it, that the doctors should just work in the hospitals and keep right out of policy because they just don't understand structure. And, but we can't just give that sort of area of endeavour away. We need it. When people are sick, they want treatments. So I don't mind a disease focus, but I think it has to be in its place, and that when we think about health, it is a sort of broad view of health, and that we understand that many things contribute to good health.
Can I just add to that? And I should have mentioned it before, but thanks for jogging my memory there, Bibi. Here in Queensland, the Queensland Government has a Parliamentary Secretary for Healthy Living. That's Murray Watt, as I recall. Thank you for correcting me. I think Murray was the original one. But anyway, so that came out of a Smart State Council recommendation to the government with the realisation that most of health is controlled by elements outside the Department of Health. I think exactly what you're saying, and the doctors and the nurses and the health practitioners look after disease and illness. But promoting health belongs in the domain of education, the employment, environment, and so on.
There might be a follow-up over there, I don't know. But this fellow's hand was up first.
Thank you. My name's Greg, and thanks to you all for coming. I appreciate the shape of the panel, so I'll try and interest you all in this question, but start with you, Michael. I'd like you to develop the case on the medical research cut, budget cut, and I'm particularly interested in tuberculosis and how will this budget cut affect any commitments Australia has to TB research. I mean, obviously TB is a big killer of people living with HIV, yeah. Leading killer of women. And the one person who I've seen get this TB into the press in Queensland is Pauline Hanson. And she used the same question that we are using in this meeting. Are we at risk? And tried to raise TB as a border security issue.
So thanks for that question. And you weren't put up to this. I've never met you before, so...
but can I just finish it? Just to BB, I'd like a human rights response to whatever's said.
So let me just quickly address the TB issue. It's not an area of my own personal research, but I'm aware there's a lot of research being done in Australia in terms of developing better vaccines for tuberculosis, and the major problems of tuberculosis coming head to head with AIDS. That comes down to infectious disease research, it comes down to clinical research, it comes down to vaccine-oriented research. So the answer to your question, how will these proposed budget cuts to the NHMRC budget affect that, is very pertinent. And I think to put that into perspective, there are people, for example, at the Centenary Institute in Sydney, to name one institute, who do work on tuberculosis, for example. The NHMRC project grant success rate is about 22%. It was last year 22%. Now, 22% in a figure where 60% of the grants, or more than that, were deemed worthy of funding, but there was only funding for 22%. So you've already cut a lot of the meat away from the bone to start with. So you're right down to the really, you've lost a lot of opportunity, is what I'm saying. If there's cuts to the NHMRC budget now, what will happen is, yes, tuberculosis research funding will be threatened, for sure. But what will happen is that the new funding will be most severely at risk, because people live from hand to mouth in medical research. It's not a job for life by any stretch of the imagination. They don't get paid big salaries. They get 3 years, at the most 5-year contracts for research. So when they get funding for research, that funding guarantees them the next 3 years. So I don't believe a cut in the medical research budget would affect those people who are currently funded, but bear in mind they might have 1 year, 2 years, or at the most 3 years of research funding to go. Who it will affect by far and away the most are people applying for new projects. So when a project expires, they apply for new areas. Like they might have gone part of the way towards developing a new drug for tuberculosis, and they've got more ideas and they want to go the next step. They might have done experiments in mice and want to put something into a clinical trial in people. So the $400 million cut will affect those people much more severely than what I'm saying is it's not evenly sliced across the top. It will affect all new projects, so it'll have a dramatic effect. And I really can't believe that the government would seriously consider cutting the NHMRC budget for two main reasons. One is you've got people, young people, middle-aged and older people, who want nothing better in their life than to improve the health of the world through medical research, and they don't get paid well for it. To put their lives and livelihoods at risk by cutting the budget, I just don't believe the government would actually do that. But secondly, the research that they do will cease. So, for example, Australia's got a very proud history in medical research. A number of Nobel Prizes, Elizabeth Blackburn being the latest one, looking at how cancer cells die through a process called apoptosis and how you can accelerate that by development of new drugs. But of course, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren showing that stomach ulcers were caused by a bacterium, not by acids, and as we were taught when we were medical students. That they have profound changes on how we are living better lives. I mean, my aunt, who's no longer with us, took a treatment to to treat her stomach ulcers because she now realised, or her doctors realised, she needed an antibiotic, not surgery. I mean, it affects our lives profoundly, medical research. I mean, the human papillomavirus vaccine has been a wonderful discovery. Now, Professor Fraser and his group are trying to develop better ways not to just prevent cervical cancer, but to treat it once a woman has cervical cancer. I mean, that research is very much at a critical stage. So if you cut the medical research budget, you'll do two major things. You'll put the lives and livelihoods of people who are the most altruistically minded people I've ever come across at severe risk. At the very best, they'll go overseas, but of course the overseas market can't take all the people that we can't support. And you put new discoveries at great risk. So I really don't believe the government will do it. They haven't said they will do it. They haven't said they won't do it. And I think it's up to everybody in the community to really lobby very hard to get the message through that this is just not acceptable. So I hope I've answered your question.
You asked for a human rights sort of flavoured response as well. There was a lot of human rights, I think, in that passionate plea from Michael. But did you want to hear anything more, and specifically around TB?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to give a medical researcher response because although I'm a lawyer, I work in the medical faculty. And what is really interesting about working in the medical faculty is none of us have something called tenure, including me, and we're all really hand to mouth. In the law faculty, everybody has tenure. We work grant to grant. So for my Health and Human Rights unit, I have to earn the money for all my staff. And we do it competitively. The idea, and I can tell you that the sort of work I do will be the first work cut. Because as, on the list of priorities for the NHMRC, as much as I would like to think otherwise, I don't think human rights really gets up there. So, as well as the young researchers, it is what seems to be less than essential that's going to go, and I think that means a lot will be lost. I think, which is not to say that there's some really stupid medical research that goes on. There is. But
we can have a discussion about that later.
And we can also have a discussion about stupid, unethical research. But even admitting that that might exist, if we let go of our intellectual life because we don't think it is as important as providing a subsidy to a food processor to produce squiggly chocolate sticks, and that's a real example, then or this other thing, I think it might have even been a Queensland invention, they're called pucks, a horrible sort of cheesy mix thing, artificial, that gets stuck on bread rolls so that you get cheese and bacon bits on it. But so this is not a discussion about TB and letting people in and out of our borders and deciding on the basis of whether they have TB, whether they're entitled to be citizens. But it is, I think, an issue for all of us if we choose to prioritise funding to really worthless and worse than worthless industrial development like squiggly chocolate sticks and give away our intellectual life.